The cold concrete of the bus stop bench was the only thing holding me up. My lower back throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache that reminded me I was carrying more than just my broken heart. I was 7 months pregnant, and for the last 3 hours, I'd been staring at a discarded candy wrapper tumbling in the wind. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, had looked me in the eye as she tossed my last suitcase onto the driveway. "Julian doesn't want a reminder of a mistake," she'd said, her voice as sharp as a razor. Julian, the man who had promised to love me until our hair turned gray, hadn't even come to the door. He'd stayed behind the tinted glass of our bedroom window, a silhouette of cowardice. I had $42 in my purse, a suitcase with a broken wheel, and a life that had been erased in the span of a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't just sad, I was hollow. You hear about people hitting rock bottom, but nobody tells you how quiet it is. It's not a crash, it's a silence so loud it rings in your ears. I looked down at my swollen ankles and tried to breathe. "Don't cry," I told myself. "If you start crying, you won't be able to see the bus." But the bus wasn't coming. The schedule was a lie, much like my marriage. I needed to move. I couldn't stay in this neighborhood where the manicured lawns felt like an insult to my mess. I stood up, the weight of the baby shifting painfully, and began to drag my suitcase toward the outskirts of the district, where the streetlights grew dim and the houses turned into warehouses. The rain started as a drizzle and quickly turned into a cold, relentless downpour. I ducked into an alleyway behind an old textile mill, seeking any kind of shelter. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a chest or a vault. It was a heavy-duty, weathered canvas duffel bag, partially tucked behind a rusted dumpster. It looked heavy, discarded. My first thought was that it was trash. My second thought, born of a desperate hunger I hadn't felt until that moment, was that there might be a dry jacket inside. I reached out, my fingers trembling from the cold, and pulled the zipper. I didn't scream. I didn't even gasp. I just stopped breathing. The bag wasn't full of clothes. It was packed, edge to edge, with bricks of cash. Hundreds, bound in tight, clinical rubber bands. The sheer volume of it felt like a hallucination brought on by stress and dehydration. I zipped it back up immediately, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might wake the baby. I looked around. The alley was empty. The world was gray. I was an abandoned pregnant woman with nothing to lose, and I was currently sitting on what looked like a fortune.
The first 48 hours were a blur of adrenaline and paralyzing fear. I didn't go to a hotel. I went to a laundromat in the worst part of town, one that stayed open 24 hours. I sat in the back with a duffel bag tucked between my feet, hidden by my oversized coat. I counted it. Not all at once, that would have been too conspicuous, but in small, frantic bursts. $5 million. It was a number that didn't feel real. It felt like a weight, a heavy, golden anchor. Every time the door opened, I felt a jolt of electricity run down my spine. Was it the owner? Was it the police? Or was it just another soul seeking shelter from the rain? I knew I couldn't just deposit it. I wasn't stupid. I had spent 5 years watching Julian and Beatrice manage their consulting firm, which I now realized was likely just a front for the same kind of greed that lived in this bag. They had treated me like a decorative accessory, a quiet girl from a small town they could mold and then discard when she became inconvenient. Julian had started seeing a woman named Clarissa, a socialite who fit Beatrice's vision of a daughter-in-law. They had cleared out my bank account, claiming joint assets were needed for a legal settlement I didn't understand. They left me with $42. Now I had $5 million. I found a small rundown apartment in a neighboring city, paying 6 months in cash to a landlord who didn't care about my name as long as the bills were crisp. I changed my appearance. I dyed my hair dark, started wearing glasses I didn't need, and adopted the name Elena. I spent my days reading. Not fiction, but books on offshore banking, real estate, and corporate shells. I realized that the best way to hide money was to turn it into something else. I began small, using a series of money orders and digital currency platforms to move the funds into a complex web of accounts I'd researched. It was slow, agonizing work, but I had nothing but time and a burning, icy core of resentment. I remember the nights most clearly. The silence of the apartment would be broken only by the sound of the radiator hissing. I would sit on the edge of the bed, my hands over my belly, feeling the rhythmic kicks of my daughter. She was the only thing that kept me grounded. I would look at the duffel bag, still partially full, and feel a sense of overwhelming responsibility. This money wasn't just a survival fund, it was a weapon. I spent hours analyzing Julian's firm, Vanguard Strategic. I knew their clients, their overhead, and their vulnerabilities. I began to realize that Beatrice had been taking risks, huge, ego-driven risks, to maintain their social standing. They were more fragile than they looked. The transformation wasn't just financial, it was internal. The Lydia who used to apologize for taking up space was fading away. In her place was someone cooler, sharper. I learned how to talk to lawyers through encrypted emails, how to set up limited liability companies in jurisdictions I'd never visited, and how to hire professionals to do my bidding without ever revealing my face. I was becoming a ghost, but a ghost with a bank account that could move mountains. I found a sense of power in my invisibility. While Julian was out at galas with Clarissa, playing the role of the successful heir, I was the one holding the threads of his future.
6 months later, I wasn't the broken girl on the bus stop bench. I was the silent majority shareholder of a holding company that was quietly snapping up the debt of Julian's firm. My daughter, Mia, was 3 weeks old, sleeping in a bassinet that cost more than Julian's first car. I had moved from the rundown apartment to a secure high-rise condo, operating through layers of lawyers who never saw my face. The view from the window was of the city skyline, but my eyes were always on the data. Julian and Beatrice's firm, Vanguard Strategic, was struggling. I knew this because I had hired a private investigator named Silas to watch them. Silas was a man of few words and high fees, but he was worth every penny. He provided me with the granular details of their lives, the mounting debt on their luxury cars, the whispers of client dissatisfaction, and the increasingly desperate loans Beatrice was taking out to cover their personal expenses. They were hemorrhaging money, trying to keep up the appearance of wealth while their foundation crumbled. They were desperate for an investor. They were looking for a savior. I decided to be that savior, but I wouldn't do it as myself. I used a middleman, a sharp, hungry young broker named Marcus, who had no idea where the money came from, only that his commission was astronomical. I instructed him to offer Vanguard a lifeline, a massive injection of capital, in exchange for a controlling interest and a seat on the board. I watched the process through Marcus's eyes. He described the way Beatrice's eyes lit up when she saw the numbers on the contract. She thought she had found a silent partner she could manipulate. She didn't realize she had invited the wolf into the foyer. The legal paperwork was a masterpiece of hidden clauses. I worked with a team of high-priced contract lawyers who didn't care about the ethics of the deal, as long as the retainers were paid. We inserted a morality and fiscal responsibility clause, a common enough addition in high-level investments, but one that was tailored specifically to Beatrice's habits. It stated that if any corporate funds were used for personal debts, or if the board members engaged in fraudulent accounting to hide personal expenses, the investor had the right to dissolve the board immediately and seize all personal collateral. Beatrice signed it without a second thought. She was too arrogant to believe she'd ever be caught. During the weeks following the investment, I watched as Julian and Beatrice breathed a sigh of relief. They went on a spending spree, thinking the new money was their personal playground. Silas sent me photos of a new sports car for Julian and an expensive renovation on Beatrice's summer home. Every dollar they spent was a nail in the coffin. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. I wasn't acting out of passion. I was acting out of justice. They had stolen my future. Now I was legally and systematically reclaiming theirs. I spent hours in my nursery, rocking Mia to sleep, while the laptop glowed in the corner. I thought about the day I found the bag. I wondered who it belonged to and if they would ever come for me. But as the months passed, it became clear that the money was truly orphaned, likely the result of some illicit deal gone wrong that no one dared report. It was a dark origin, but I was using it for a light purpose. I was ensuring that my daughter would never have to rely on someone as weak as Julian. I was building her a legacy on the ruins of the people who had tried to deny her existence. The day of the first board meeting arrived, a morning filled with a cold, sharpening clarity. I wasn't going to show up, not yet. I sent Marcus with a specific set of instructions and a hidden camera. I sat in my darkened living room, Mia asleep in my lap, watching the live feed on my laptop.
The room at Vanguard was opulent. Mahogany tables, leather chairs, the smell of expensive cologne, and the metallic tang of desperation. Beatrice was there, wearing a pearl necklace that I recognized instantly. It was a family heirloom she'd told me was too good for me to wear at our wedding. Seeing it around her neck now felt like a physical weight, a reminder of every time she had looked down her nose at my simple upbringing. Julian sat next to her, looking 20 years older than he had 6 months ago. His tailored suit seemed a size too large, and he was fidgeting with a gold pen, his eyes darting toward Marcus with a mixture of hope and terror. He looked like a man drowning, staring at the person he thought was his lifeguard. "We have a problem," Marcus said on the screen, his voice as calm as a frozen lake. He didn't rush. He let the silence stretch until Beatrice began to shift uncomfortably. He then laid out the findings of the forensic audit. The irregularities weren't just mistakes, they were a roadmap of greed. Beatrice had been funneling millions into offshore accounts to pay off the very debts that had crippled them before my investment. She had even used the company credit line to buy Clarissa an engagement ring that rivaled the one Julian had given me, a ring I had been forced to sell for food money months ago. The look on Beatrice's face was a study in crumbling arrogance. It was a mixture of shock, indignation, and for the first time, genuine, shivering fear. She tried to bluster her way through it, her voice rising to that shrill pitch I knew so well. "This is a misunderstanding. These were necessary business expenses to maintain our prestige. You don't understand how this world works, Mr. Sterling," she shouted, her voice cracking like dry wood. But Marcus didn't flinch. He simply pointed to the contract she had signed, the one with the morality and fiscal responsibility clause. I watched him tap the paper, his finger landing exactly where her shaky signature sat. "The investor is not satisfied with these explanations. In fact, the investor has invoked Clause 12. As of this moment, the board of Vanguard Strategic is dissolved. All assets, including the personal residences and vehicles listed as collateral, are now under the control of the majority shareholder. You are effectively trespassers in your own building." Julian looked like he had been struck across the face. He put his head in his hands, his gold pen finally slipping from his fingers and rolling across the mahogany table with a hollow sound. "Who is the investor, Marcus? We have a right to know who is destroying us. We deserve to speak to them face to face. We aren't just names on a ledger." "You're not being destroyed, Julian. You're being held accountable, and the owner is coming to meet you now." I stood up from my desk at home. My heart finally found a steady, powerful rhythm. I had been waiting for this moment for 8 months, rehearsing the walk and the breath. I wore a tailored suit of charcoal gray, a color of strength and neutrality. I didn't want to look like the victim they remembered. I wanted to look like the person who held their lives in her palm. As I drove to the Vanguard offices, I thought about the bus stop. I thought about the smell of the rain and the feeling of the baby kicking against my ribs while I wondered if we'd have a place to sleep. That girl was gone, but her memory was the fire in my veins. When I walked into the building, the security guards, who had previously been told to escort me out if I ever showed my face, now stood aside and opened the doors with practiced deference. I pushed open the double doors of the conference room. The air was thick with tension. When Beatrice saw me, her jaw literally dropped. Julian looked up, his eyes widening in a disbelief so profound it looked like physical pain. I didn't wait for them to speak. I walked to the head of the table, the seat Beatrice had occupied for 30 years, and sat down. "Lydia?" Julian whispered, his voice trembling so hard it was barely a breath. "Is this a joke? Where did you get the clothes? Who is the man behind you? Who are you working for?" "No one, Julian," my voice steady, resonant, and devoid of the sweetness he used to exploit. "I'm not working for anyone. I own the chair you're sitting in. I own the air you're breathing in this room. And I think it's time we discussed your exit strategy. You wanted a face-to-face meeting. Here I am." I watched Beatrice's eyes. She wasn't just surprised, she was recalculating. I could see the wheels turning as she looked for a way to manipulate me, still believing I was the same girl she had tossed out in the rain like a bag of trash. She didn't realize that Lydia was a ghost. Elena had taken her place, and Elena didn't negotiate with snakes.
The confrontation wasn't loud. It didn't need to be.
I had the power, the paperwork, and the truth on my side, and those three things are quieter and deadlier than any scream. Beatrice tried to launch into a tirade about how ungrateful I was, how she had rescued me from my middle-class life and brought me into their elite world. She spoke as if she had done me a favor by letting me marry her son. I simply held up a hand. The gesture silenced her instantly. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her social status was a house of cards, and I was the wind. "I have 2 files here," I said, placing them on the table with a deliberate, heavy thud. "The first is the result of the forensic audit. It contains enough evidence of embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion to put both of you in prison for the next 20 years. I've already had my legal team draft the criminal complaint. I have records of every single dollar you siphoned from the investment to cover your personal gambling debts, Beatrice. I have the receipts for the jewelry and the sports cars you bought with money meant to save your employees' jobs." Julian went pale, a sickly shade of gray that matched the walls. "Lydia, please, you wouldn't do that to us. We're family. Think of the baby. Think of what people in our circle will say. This will ruin the family name forever." "I am thinking of her," I said, leaning forward until I could see the sweat on his forehead. "I'm thinking about how her father didn't care if she had a roof over her head or a blanket to keep her warm. I'm thinking about how her grandmother called her a stain on the family legacy. Do you remember that, Beatrice? You told me I was a liability. You told me my child was a mistake that needed to be erased. Well, look at the legacy now. Your family name is a pile of debt and a folder full of felonies. You aren't elite anymore. You're just 2 people who got caught stealing." I pushed the second folder toward them. "This second file is your only exit. It is a full relinquishment of all assets, a non-disclosure agreement, and a permanent restraining order. You will leave this city. You will never contact me or my daughter again. You will sign over the deed to the mansion you bought for Clarissa. I've already arranged for it to be sold with every cent of the proceeds going to a charity for homeless mothers and victims of domestic neglect. You will leave with exactly what you gave me on that Tuesday afternoon. Nothing but the clothes on your back and the shame of what you've done." Beatrice was shaking with a rage so intense she looked like she might shatter. "You can't do this. You found that money. You're just a lucky girl who stumbled into a bag of cash. You're just as much of a criminal as anyone else. We will fight this in court until you're old and gray." "With what money, Beatrice?" I asked softly, the question hanging in the air like a blade. "I've already frozen the corporate accounts. Your personal credit cards will be declined by dinner time. You have no lawyers who will work for free. You have no allies in the city who will take a call from a fraudster. You have 5 minutes to sign, or I call the district attorney. He's already on standby, and believe me, he's very interested in the $3 million you moved through the Cayman accounts." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Beatrice's ragged breathing. Julian looked at Beatrice, then at me. He saw no mercy in my eyes, no lingering affection, and no sweet Lydia left to beg. He saw the woman he had underestimated, and he finally understood that he had lost the only real thing he ever had. He reached for the pen first. His hand shook so badly the pen rattled against the desk. But he signed. He signed away his inheritance, his home, his cars, and his pride. Beatrice followed, her signature a jagged, ugly scrawl of pure resentment. As they walked out of the building, Beatrice clutching her designer purse like a shield, Julian looking like a ghost wandering through a world he no longer understood, I didn't feel the burst of joy I had expected. Instead, I felt a deep, profound sense of relief. The debt was settled, not just the financial one, but the moral one. I stayed in the room for a long time after they left, listening to the hum of the air conditioning and the quiet of the city outside. It was the sound of freedom. I went back to my condo and picked up Mia. I sat on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and violet. I was a millionaire, a business owner, and a mother. But more than that, I was a woman who survived the worst the world could throw at her and came out stronger. The bag of gold was the catalyst, but the strength had always been mine.
I had turned $42 and a broken heart into a future where my daughter would never have to wonder if she was wanted. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had dragged a broken suitcase through the rain. They were steady now. I was no longer a ghost in the machine. I was the one running it. And as the city lights began to twinkle below me, I knew that the weight of the gold was finally gone. In its place was something much lighter and much more valuable. Peace.